Raising Unicorns.
Harmon Brothers.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Raising Unicorns podcast. I have with me the one, the freaking only, Brett Crockett.
Oh, hey.
What's up, Brett?
Hey, Shane.
Hey, man. We're going to cover a marketing book that has inspired us.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for a book throwdown.
And Brett actually suggested this one to me. I hadn't read it. Brett, you've read this one before.
Yeah, I read it not too long ago. It actually came out in 2013. So it's been out there for a long time. Maybe some of our listeners know about it, but I think it's a great one to cover.
Super interesting book. The guy, I promised Brett I wouldn't talk about this long. What's the author's name?
We should cover it. It's Rob Fitzpatrick.
Rob Fitzpatrick. I don't know what his background is. Do you? I was going to ask you this.
Yeah, he's like a serial entrepreneur. So
but
he
you know any
retired
companies that he did?
Mostly tech companies. So he went through Y Combinator and some of that kind of stuff.
Okay,
and,
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't really mention that in the book, but
right.
You can tell. I was telling Brett, it sounds like a classic, like kind of
tech guy,
tech savant who might have some social oddities, but like is also brilliant.
If you do the audio book, you'll probably pick up on that.
Well, because he narrates it himself.
Right.
So if you go download this based off of this recommendation, just be warned.
Yeah,
it is a little rough at times. It's
like watching or listening to a live seminar.
Yeah, it does feel like he recorded the whole thing live.
Yeah.
Zero editing.
Yeah. Anyway, good stuff.
Great stuff. Let's get into like the premise of the book just overall, right? Premise of the book, it's called The Mom Test. And since, like Brett said, this guy's a serial entrepreneur, and he kind of came up with this concept of like how to avoid gathering bad data about creation of new products and getting answers to your questions about your products that are what he calls the mom answers, which are usually people who are your close friends who care about you, and you ask them questions about your product and they give you basically garbage data where they're like, yeah, that's awesome.
Right.
I would definitely pay money for that. You're smart. Like, I think you're going to succeed.
And I've had that feedback in a lot of cases. And sometimes you know that it's kind of that mom feedback and sometimes you don't.
But it's hard to get out of it if you ask the wrong questions or you set it up improperly.
Yeah. And usually you have yourself to blame for that. I mean, because if you're asking people that you know and who love you, like that kind of stuff, of course they're going to try to make you feel good. But his point is get good data by asking great questions, basically. And so I think it's really helpful. The other thing I would say about the content of the book is it's not conceptual. It's almost a how-to. And so
it's very grounded.
Yeah, very like hands-on. You can go and implement this stuff. And that's one of the things I like about it.
There's even a section where he like spells out exactly what an email he sent to someone he wanted to get on his advisory board, how he structured it and why he changed it certain ways. You're like, oh, this is like copy and paste, like for if you're trying to do something similar to this.
Yep.
And I thought it was interesting because like we ask a lot of questions around our creative. I'm trying to understand like how people are perceiving it.
Yeah.
But this is primarily about products. And we've done some product development stuff with our companies when we're doing campaigns, when they're still designing the product or trying to nail their product. But most of the time, for a creative standpoint, it's not necessarily like you're trying to nail a product. Your product is the creative itself in a very similar way. There's some places where it doesn't cross over exactly 100%, but I think a lot of the principles apply 100%.
Yeah, for sure they do. And I think as creatives, you guys go and you talk to people who are out there sharing ideas with people. Yeah. And they're getting feedback that instead of just not being helpful, actually leads them down the wrong path. And what I mean by that is when someone on the creative team at Harmon Brothers comes and shares content with somebody to say like, hey, what do you think of this? How do you like it? There are, and you've mentioned this before in other podcasts, there are certain people you can go to and you know that you'll get a straight answer. But then there's others that if you take...
brutal, honest, hates it if she hates it. What?
Yeah, so
loves it if she loves it.
There are certain people who you know you're going to get straight answers from, which is actually, even though it can be painful, is what you need, right?
Yeah.
That he made from the book that I took a note on was he calls good data the data that tells you what your customers are looking for and what they're willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
And so when that comes to content, there are a couple of ways that we get that feedback. One of them obviously is just to go out and ask certain people that you know, whether it's Tyler or Caitlin or somebody who's maybe a little more gentle. The other way that we do it though is through brain trusts. So we might talk a little bit about that. In fact, you're a part of brain trusts, all brain trusts, right?
Yeah.
So tell us how those work, kind of what they mean and why they're helpful as opposed to like a focus group or something like that?
Primarily, like we focus on is two parts, like how well is the messaging working and is it clear? And then the other is like, is it working as a whole piece, like humor wise? Is it gelling like as a piece of content? Is it hitting its mark? How clear is the messaging? And then how compelling is that like messaging in there? Does it make me want to buy the product? Like in Dave Vance, he used to write for us all the time. One of the former partners at the agency. He always said, I just use my own internal compass of like, does it make me want to buy the product even if I don't need the product? It's very effective, like messaging. And so that's like what we look for in our brain trust. How clear is the messaging? How effective is it at wanting us to want that product, as well as like how well it's working comedically? Because those are kind of all signature things that like we look at our creative and that we're known for. There was the three things that he said to look for I loved was compliments, fluff, and ideas are all like three things like I should avoid like
Cut
the
out,
plague and try and like dig in. So if someone like gives you a compliment, you double down on that. Like his advice that he gave in on that was like, if someone gives you a compliment, oh, that's a really good idea. Or like, oh, I've never thought of that. Like, and then ask a follow-up question of like, oh, when was the last time you Googled a solution for this? Like, and if they have it, one of his litmus tests that he had in there, if they'd never cared enough to Google a solution, they're never going to care enough to pay their own money for your product, right? Which I thought was such a good, that's like true. It's like, how many times am I annoyed by something, but I don't even Google it to see if there's a solution? I think what's not working is the more important part of like, I don't know if he mentioned this, but this is something we do and we employ on our brain trust outside of the company, is we ask them what wasn't working.
Right.
You don't ask the question of,
what did you like?
Was there anything that didn't work? Because then they can say no.
Yeah.
You have to say what was not working for you in this commercial, and then they have to think and rack their brain, like because they're gonna have like, hey, it makes them be cornered a little bit.
Yeah. Or where did you get confused? Or where did we start to lose you? Like those questions, just assuming that the answer is there, I think are much better questions than, well, what did you like best?
Yeah.
Or like, was there anything you didn't find funny?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Because I feel like those questions, like it gives them like a little bit of permission to be like, oh, I like can do this. And he's actually looking for this and it's helpful versus just being like, I'm here to stroke your ego, which is oddly enough, like something people often want to do.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely. Well,
because your friends usually.
Yeah,
right?
People want it and people want to give it as well, I feel like.
Yeah.
But again, it has the ability to take you down the wrong path instead of being
very
helpful.
Easily.
It's hurtful. One of the things that you were mentioning is about the laughs. And that kind of goes into another note that I took from the book where he talks about don't look for compliments, look for commitments. And one of the things I love that we do at Harmon Brothers is something that deals specifically with that. And I believe that an actual laugh is a commitment, as he talked about it in the book.
So one thing I thought he did really well, he talked about is like respecting other people's time and how when you ask them to like give you feedback on something, whether it's creative or a product, if you show respect for their time, they're going to give you more valuable information. But if you show disrespect for it, if you try and shoot the breeze too long, it's just like you're not valuing their time and they're not going to give you as much thought or care into the answers you're wanting, which again, voids the whole purpose of getting all this information and asking these questions. So just being mindful of people's time and respectful of it, especially if you're going to get like someone's time who's tough to get a hold of or like is busy.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. You're getting a ton of value out of these generally. If you're asking the right questions, right? And again, if you go and read the book or listen to the book, you'll see how he lays out the questions, what makes a good question versus a bad question. That's part of what, again, I loved about the book is just it's so hands-on.
Oh, so I wrote something down here that I thought was a really interesting note that he had here. It says, you are not allowed to tell a customer what their problems are, and they are not allowed to tell you what to build.
Yeah, I think it's a good point because if you're telling, or you say you're not allowed to ask people?
Or you're not allowed to tell customers what their problems are.
Yeah, so I think a lot of times what happens is we ask leading questions, right? And so if you're telling them what their problems are, then number one, they're going to agree with that. And then you're already off to the wrong start, right?
The three that he says to avoid, the compliments, the fluff, and ideas. On the fluff, one of the ways I think it's really beneficial that he clarified is like, if someone says, yeah, I do that all the time, like when you're asking, like, do you have this problem or that problem? And I think this is even helpful in script writing when you're trying to understand like how, because people come to us with really good products, but often their messaging is totally off.
Yeah.
And they don't know how to actually talk to people and actually talk to them in a way where it addresses their problem really specifically. So I think this question works really well for even creative and crafting a piece of creative that is selling that product, right?
Right.
And asking people like, do you deal with X? And if they say, oh yeah, all the time, like ask a follow-up question of like, okay, when was the last time you dealt with that? How recently was it? And then what did you do like to fix that problem, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I actually took notes on something similar. So he boils the mom test down to 3 things. He says, number 1, talk about their life instead of your idea. And that goes back to that kind of last point we talked about, I think. He said, ask about specifics in the past instead of generics or opinions about the future.
Yeah.
So to your point, instead of saying, hey, do you deal with this? Or you could ask that question, but then if they say yes, say, okay, when was the last time? It's like, when was the last time you Googled that thing or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then the third one was to talk less and listen more. And I attribute that one as like, your talking should mostly be asking questions, right? Instead of...
Or clarifying even, clarifying the questions even further.
Making sure that you understood them, like some of that kind of stuff. And when you're doing that, just making sure that you're not, again, leading them on or putting words in their mouth, that sort of stuff.
For sure.
And so those are like the 3 things that he considers the mom test. So often we get most of those backwards. So we talk about our idea instead of their life, or we talk about their opinions about the future. Like, would you do this if this thing were available? Instead of what they've done in the past or what they're doing right now. And when you flip those, then you're going to the bad information, the unhelpful information, instead of getting to the good stuff. This idea of not getting honest feedback reminds me of when I go to Costco and they have samples, right? And so I go and I get a chalupa and I'm like, oh, this chalupa is delicious. And they have the boxes sitting there and it's these ladies that this is their job, like microwaving a chalupa and giving it to all these needy people who are walking down the aisles.
Who shop hungry like idiots.
Yeah, exactly.
Gosh.
And so I make it a point to go over and take the box and pretend like I'm going to go buy it. But then usually I walk around the corner and stash the box somewhere and then go check out without purchasing. It's because, again, I don't want the lady to feel bad. Like, she cooked this thing for me and then I'm just going to be like, yeah, thanks for the free food and leave. Like, I have to at least tell her, like, I don't know. Maybe that's bad.
Do they care? Do they get paid off commission?
I don't know, but it would make me feel good if I cooked something for someone and they said, that's delicious, I'm going to go buy a box. But the problem is that I guess it is. I am a monster because I'm not being truthful with them. But I just want to feel good.
You're the bad data. You're your own problem.
I know, but anyway.
So one of the things that he puts in the books that was a huge lesson for me, like, he's usually talking for the mindset of like an entrepreneur who's pitching an idea for a company.
Right.
Worst thing you could do is actually pitch your idea and actually introduce your idea. But a lot of your questions should be around the problem that your product is aiming to solve and how big that problem is. And I think with like content, it's a little tougher because it's obviously like designed and kind of crafted to sell an idea or a product. But like, I think one of the things that's maybe helpful is to not at all say like, hey, I'm directing this commercial.
Oh, for sure.
Can you look at this? Like, hey, this is something like I'm trying to get feedback on from this. Oftentimes, like, we pay like interns to go out to different places and find these people, not even like people who are emotionally invested into it, which I think is a benefit.
Yeah.
Because they're just like, hey, can I get your feedback on this video?
Right.
Like, and then they don't say like, I made it. Like, I shot this video, or I directed this video, or I'm editing this video.
Or I have microwaved this chalupa.
This chalupa. This poor lady. So much bad data.
It's you have to separate yourself from the product or the service or whatever it is in order to get people to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I guess you don't have to, but I think it helps to do it that way. That's like the key to this whole book is he's trying to help us find the ways to ask the right questions so that we can get good info and create good products instead of just wallowing around kind of in the wilderness by asking the wrong questions, getting bad feedback.
Yeah. And I think that like in the creative process, it's also interesting too, like just talk, like at least for me, when I was a creative director, like working on projects, like when I would want to go learn something about him, I would try and not stipulate, hey, I'm working on a script. It'd be like, I would go talk to these person, be like, hey, I got a random question. Like when I was working on chapbooks back in the day, I'm like, what do you do with all your photos on your phone?
Yeah.
Like, does that make you have anxiety having them on there? Do you like put them on Google Drive? Like, what do you do? Like, like, do you miss having printed photos? Do you wish you printed more photos? I tried not to mention chapbooks until the end of that discussion with those people.
Yeah.
Because I thought it was very helpful and insightful to like understand like their core motivations and problems they were facing.
You talked to real users, figured out what they actually wanted or what their actual pain point was.
And they could have gone a lot of directions, but we really focused in on like the biggest problem. Because there were other problems that they had, but it was like, what was the biggest barrier to like printing their photos? And that was it. It was just time.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I wanted to bring up is that bad data is one thing he talks about, of getting bad data or like false positives on stuff when you're asking the wrong questions. But I also think he brings this up too when he was talking about cold emailing people. He said if you send out 98 cold emails and you only get 2 back, like don't take that as a sign of an analysis of that. Shouldn't be like, oh, it's a failure because only 2 people responded. It should be like, oh, out of this like 100 cold emails, which nobody responds to, 2 people responded to it. And so I think the analysis of the data, as like you have to get good data, but then good analysis too, and interpretation of that. And I think that you just have to think a little bit longer about that, like the implications of the data, and actually like simmer on it a little bit longer, and don't jump to the first conclusion, because oftentimes that first conclusion isn't the right one. And I feel like thinking about it a little bit deeper and looking for the insight that's beneath that surface level view of the data you get back is really, really critical to understanding, both from on the creative side as well as like on a product side, of like, what are they really saying here? Or what does this really mean for the product or for the creative?
Great point.
So takeaways from this week's episode. Number 1,
get good data by asking the right questions.
Solid. Number 2, ask the right people to get the right data.
And number 3, don't look for compliments, look for commitments.
That's perfect, man. Love it.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good week.
Thank you for watching Raising Unicorns!
Subscribe now.